Welcome to the MPH Lens. I'm your host, Brianna Y'all. Come learn as we dive into mental health conversations to help you better address your mental health challenges as a public health professional. Being a caregiver, a student, and a public health professional can be challenging. It can also have a significant impact on an individual's personal and professional life. Mental health plays a vital role in one's overall well-being. It is deemed just as important as one's physical health. Graduate students too often cross paths with mental health challenges as they manage their studies, personal life, and professional life. It demands strong organizational skills, emotional resilience, and a commitment to personal and professional growth. Seeking support from educational institutions, employers, and caregiver support networks can be invaluable in successfully managing these diverse roles. Hello, this is Brianna Yaw, Associate Student Contributor at the Public Health Millennial. Welcome to the MPH Lens, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness from the lens of an MPH student. Today, we will discuss how to prioritize your well-being and still achieve your professional and educational goals. Joining us on today's episode, we have Win, who is here to share her knowledge on well-being as well as highlight the importance of managing physical and mental wellness from the perspective of an MPH student, full-time professional, and caregiver. Gwen is an MPH candidate at UNC Gillings Global School of Public Health and is a director of community and growth at Acclinate after spending 6 years working at Google. She's known for expertise in wellness, mental health, and health equity. Through her platform, Say When, she helps change makers fill their own cups with sustainable workout routines, wellness habits, and community. Welcome, Gwen.
Thank you, Brianna.
Such a pleasure to have you on our show today. How are you doing?
I am happy to be here. How are you?
I'm doing great. Such a pleasure. Tell us about your personal and professional background.
Okay, sure. So thank you, Brianna, again for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Huyen, and I am based in Atlanta. My family immigrated here from Vietnam, and I'm the eldest of 4, first generation, all of that stuff. I started school thinking I was going to become a doctor, like many MPH students, but I also did not know what public health really was when I started college. I ended up majoring in business because that was the fastest way to get a job and help my mom stop working because she was a single mom. And I also double majored in philosophy. When I left school, I found myself as a personal trainer. I've been an athlete for a good amount of my life, and I really have enjoyed coaching folks, which I still do part time. But I decided to take a full time role at Google, where I was for 6 years. And during the latter part of my journey at Google, I focused on employee mental health. But all the health promotions I was doing at Google, I didn't realize was public health. And I found out that public health was something I was naturally getting into, and equity is a core value of mine. So I decided to lean into that. Took a role at Acclinate, which is a health tech startup focused on health equity through inclusive clinical research, and then also decided to deepen my knowledge by pursuing my MPH at Gillings.
Awesome. So many great things and so many great, I should definitely be proud. I would love to hear, what does mental health mean to you on a personal level, and like your journey at recognizing the importance of what mental health means to you?
Yeah, so mental health to me is definitely something that is foundational. It helps me show up better for not only myself, but also for the people I care about and for my community. It is filled, or mental health is definitely something that is impacted by my physical health, my social well being, my financial health, even. So it definitely encompasses all the other facets of health. But mental health came to the forefront for me definitely more towards during the pandemic, like a lot of folks. That was when I really had taken on full responsibilities as a caregiver for my mom, who is a stroke survivor, while navigating a pandemic like the rest of the world. And I really had to lean into proactively taking care. Actually, it wasn't proactive. It was as a result of all of that stuff. I had to do something to make sure that, again, I was showing up best for myself, my mom, for my job, and for my community. So that's when I really started leaning into my mental health a lot more.
Quick break. Come join the public health community with a 7-day free trial. You'll get access to learn, navigate, and transform your public health career through mentorship, coaching calls, resume, cover letter, and LinkedIn workshops, exclusive videos from yours truly, and much, much more. If you've been looking for career support, mentorship, or want to build your brand, look no further. Join the public health community today for a 7-day free trial at phmillennial.com/join or from the link below. Let's build a stronger public health community together. Now, back to the show.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and such an amazing story. I'm so curious to know, like, how do you champion health without sacrificing your own, especially after experiencing the health of a loved one declining or having to tend to a loved one? And oftentimes, caretakers, they are the quickest to, or easily can, neglect themselves because you want to just tend to, your loved one's needs. And it's so easy to kind of forget about your own needs. So how do you achieve that without sacrificing your well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely not intuitive. I think a lot of folks who have found themselves in caregiver positions or even leadership positions in general, and also women in general, often find themselves kind of holding a very large load on their back in terms of wanting to show up for others and wanting to take care of others. So I definitely found myself in that position where I was saying yes to a lot of things and making time for a lot of other people's needs and not necessarily prioritizing my own. And sometimes it would come out in terms of me not being as patient as I would like to be, in terms of being a lot more tired. And those were kind of some signals that I wasn't doing the best job at taking care of my mental health. And I didn't necessarily tie it to, okay, I'm not doing enough self-care. But it took a friend kind of recommending a book to me. My friend recommended a book called Codependent No More after I had kind of vented to him about my experiences with caregiving during the pandemic. And it was a great book that kind of highlighted ways that you might think that you are caring for someone, but you are instead actually compromising both your own and the other person's well-being by not prioritizing yourself. So that book was definitely a wake-up call for me to realize, okay, if I'm not proactive about this, no matter how much I say that I'm doing XYZ in order to care for others, if I don't carve out that time to care for myself and kind of detach myself from that identity as a caregiver at some points and recognize my own personhood, then I wasn't going to show up well for anyone. So that book was definitely a really helpful wake-up call.
Awesome. I definitely will look into that book recommendation. But just to piggyback on you mentioning codependency, I feel like that is definitely something that needs to be talked about more and is not often talked about. I think codependency, those attachments dictate how you show up for yourself and how you show up for others. So it's so important to be attentive to yourself, in those moments or in certain patterns where it's either benefiting you or it comes across as you not meeting your needs and your loved ones' needs, or just, I feel like life at the end of the day is for certain balance. And codependency, from me personally, is something that I felt like I struggled with. So I definitely resonated with you even mentioning that. I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's something that I've been discovering on my own, and seeing how that contributes to how I show up in certain situations. And it causes you to reevaluate how to better those outcomes so that you can still maintain your well-being, but also meet your goals. I feel like as healthcare professionals and as students, and in the climate that we're in, um, it's just so common for us to fall into, okay, we have to be that overachiever and we constantly have to um, overextend ourselves to get that recognition that we want in those spaces. And it's so important to not only, it's great to have your goals, but to keep in mind of, where you are, where's your mental state as you are pursuing those things. So I love that you mentioned that. But moving on, um, so how how can individuals prioritize their physical and mental health in their daily routines? You mentioned how you are an athlete and that you're very active. So what is your approach to prioritizing physical and mental health into your daily routine?
Okay. So for me, I love having a strong start to my day as well as a strong end to my day. So what that looks like is for me waking up early, because I think the morning hours are very underrated for
Yeah.
not only productivity, but really for just having a mindful start to being able to control the direction of your day
Mhm.
and be creative and express and set the direction before things kind of come at you. Yes, in the morning, that's kind of what it looks like ideally. And if possible, to make it more tangible, I would recommend waking up at least 1 hour before the first thing that you have on your schedule, whether that's exercising or your first meeting, or let's say if you typically start your day at 9 or 8, waking up at least an hour before that and easing into your day so that you can kind of have that confidence, that ease, that you are kind of the captain of your ship, right?
Yeah.
And then usually that sets the tone so that as you go throughout the day, you have a little bit more clarity, a little bit more focus, as opposed to if you had started your day scrolling through Instagram or scrolling through Twitter, and then whatever news is coming at you, right? First thing, sometimes you get fixated on that. And sometimes your brain gets into this pattern of jumping from one thing to another,
Mhm.
which might not be ideal if you're trying to get certain things done. Then towards the end of the day, this is something that I'm still working on, is sticking to a good wind down routine, but sleep is so essential for us, right? In terms of helping us regulate our emotions, processing memories for the day, and then just generally feeling energized. And if we work out, then that's when our muscles heal and get stronger, right? So if we don't prioritize winding down so that we set ourselves up for a great night's sleep, then that can also be detrimental and then lead you into a rough start to your next morning, right?
Yeah.
So for me, in an ideal world, then I would shut down electronics an hour before I'm trying to go to sleep, and then just do whatever activities are kind of relaxing to me. So that might be tidying up my space, that might be helping my mom get ready for bed. A hot shower is definitely part of that. And then sometimes reading and journaling and recapping my day so that, again, when I go to bed, I'm kind of directing where I want my mind to focus, what I want to process, as opposed to whatever social media sends to me or tells me I should be paying attention to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think having that strong start to your morning and a solid end to your day, when you have both of those, then everything else in between kind of falls in line.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And I love how you mentioned, I felt like it somewhat summarized just overstimulation. I feel like as students and we're balancing, there's students who are not only balancing their careers and jobs, but there's some students who are parents and they have outside responsibilities. They're, caretakers, they have other responsibilities to tend to. So it's so often that we kind of busy our mind with things and it's difficult to know when to wind down or to kind of give us ourselves that additional time to better jumpstart our day. And
Right.
even personally, I've as a student, I feel like I've always had like a chaotic schedule. I feel like, You always get so much things thrown at you. There's so many deadlines that you have to meet. And balancing so many things at once, it's so easy to kind of neglect, like, oh, like you feel like your only time to yourself is at night. So you tend to stay up later, and
Yeah,
that ends up hindering, how you show up the next day, or
right,
knowing that you have an early morning, but you only give yourself a short span of time to get ready. Having
right.
that chaotic start to your day, it does set the tone. It does kind of, it is a domino effect for certain. And it's just recently where I practiced, like, oh, let me give myself additional time, like, and motivate myself, like, okay, if I wake up a little bit earlier and, I listen to my music, it takes my time to have my coffee and relax before I
Hmm.
start my day, the difference is so significant. So I completely agree. It's definitely how you begin and how you start your day that sets the tone. And it could be so many things being jumped at you, but you would feel more prepared to handle it when you prioritize how you begin and start your day.
Yeah.
Um, Love that response. And moving on. So, as a professional and graduate student, how do you avoid burnout? This is a huge question that I always ask everybody, because I feel like somebody who is just pursuing this career path in general, I often hear so many professionals wear so many hats, are a part of so many organizations, and they fulfill so many roles. And it's kind of like, where do you find the time to pour back into yourself? Like, there's just no time. So, how do you avoid burnout? Or
Yeah,
how would you
absolutely.
advise for students, you know, who are in the graduate program or are pursuing the healthcare profession, public health profession? How would you advise for them to avoid burnout?
Yeah. So to avoid burnout, I would definitely recommend that folks front load the activities that fill their cup. So
Mhm.
whether that be journaling, listening to music, like you said, for me, it's movement and exercise.
Mhm.
Whatever that activity is, prioritize it towards the beginning of the day, even if that means waking up really early, because so many things can be thrown at us throughout the day that sometimes if you say, okay, after work is when I'm going to do this activity that's relaxing, that energizes me, that makes me happy, that brings me joy, then sometimes that thing gets kind of completely pushed off the calendar if 10
Mhm.
people have asked you for something. And boundary setting is a whole another thing we could talk
Yeah.
about, right? But sometimes it's hard and sometimes urgent things do come up as the day goes on. And some of those things you do want to prioritize even with firm boundaries. But if you prioritize that cup filling activity at the beginning, then regardless of what happens throughout the day, then you can remember and be energized by the fact that you were able to pour into yourself first. So that's
Mhm.
one thing that I definitely recommend. And along those similar lines, in terms of prioritizing and thinking about how your day is structured, I'm a big fan of calendar blocking.
Yeah.
And all that means is that you almost put every single activity into your calendar, whether that's walking your dog, going to lunch, of course, all your meetings, of course, your classes, but time for homework, time to drive XYZ, even time with friends, social activities go on my
Yeah.
calendar. The gym goes on my calendar. Everything is on there. So that one, if someone is trying to book time with me, my calendar is public to my working team at least. So they see, like, oh, Win might not be responding because she's at the gym right now or she's taking her mom to her part time job. My mom works at Goodwill.
Mhm.
Um, and then you also don't forget things, right? Like if, because
Yeah.
sometimes even social things that you look forward to, you might forget if you're like, oh, I have a paper I'm going to work on tonight, but it's my friend's birthday dinner.
Yeah.
Having those things blocked off can help you prioritize. And then, especially as a student, what I definitely recommend is taking a look at your syllabus at the beginning, of course, and then jotting down not only the due dates for things, but also putting calendar blocks as reminders for when certain assignments are due. So if an assignment is due on, let's say, the 31st of the month, then especially if it's a big assignment that's not just, I don't know, a quick article. If it's going to be an exam or a paper or whatever, then I have like a 3-day or even a 1-week reminder for myself that this assignment is due next week, so that it's on my radar and it's not like, oh, it pops up that morning and I freak out that I forgot about an assignment being due, right? So I definitely recommend scheduling your priorities and then prioritizing your schedule, because some people just are like, whatever gets thrown on my calendar by other people, right, is what I prioritize. But if you put in the things that are important to you and then prioritize that, usually that helps you ensure that you are taking care of all of the things that are most important to you without getting kind of scrambled and forgetful. And yeah.
I love that tip. I've never done that, but I definitely will be trying that out next semester, because that is so true. It's so easy to forget certain things or the little details, arrangements that you made with certain people when you have so many things to do. And for me too, like if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. So I definitely feel like that is such an amazing, a great tip for people to utilize. Um, and just to change gears, you've mentioned your experience of fulfilling a role as a caretaker for your mom. And, I could only imagine how difficult that transition was for you and your family. How did this impact your mental health, and what healthy actions did you do to overcome and manage this?
Yeah. And I want to emphasize with the last tip of scheduling and calendar blocking that you can literally calendar block time to do nothing. Like there can be
Yes.
a block of 4 hours where you say, this is Brianna's do nothing time or Brianna's self-care time, whatever it is, just to make sure that you also don't forget that instead of I'm going to get ahead of my homework or whatever it is, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes again, we keep working and we forget to do those activities that help us recharge. So it doesn't always have to be, an activity. It can be self-care time or detachment time that you block off there. And that can remind you, not to deprioritize that. But in terms of how becoming a caregiver impacted my mental health, it was definitely difficult, and it brought mental health to the forefront for me because it was something that, again, I generally took for granted. Overall, I had ups and downs like anyone else, but being a caregiver, there's just a lot more demands and a lot of things that are pulling at your attention. And it can get to a point where you realize that you're really tired, and maybe for me, not as patient, and you don't realize that it's because you haven't been taking care of yourself as much and that the caregiving is taking a toll. I think sometimes we don't think about that as caregivers because the caregiving is such a fulfilling activity in terms of you're taking care of someone you love, right? So how can that have a negative aspect to it? But at the end of the day, it takes a lot of energy. And when you're running on E, like a car that you have the tank on low all of the time, it's not going to run as well. And as people, we're going to kind of do the same thing, right? So again, I realized that as a caregiver, I wasn't taking enough time to recharge. So what I did was I started taking 1 day a week that I didn't do anything for anyone else. As selfish as that may sound, it's kind of what it took, because Monday through Sunday, before I started these kind of self-care Sunday practices, I was doing everything for everyone else in terms of my job, my mom, my friends, whatever other folks needed me to do, that's what I would prioritize. So it really helped me to take 1 day where I did what I felt like I needed to do, what I felt like recharged me, and that helped me reset and create more space to do stuff for other people again the following day. And that just made a really, really huge difference. And at first it was hard because my mom was definitely like, oh, I'm asking you for this one small thing. And if it wasn't an urgent thing, even if it was small, I would have to say no in order to establish this boundary for myself. Because, you say yes to one small thing, and then it's like, oh, well, how about this thing and then that thing. So I had to be really firm about protecting my self-care Sundays. And to be honest, that has kind of fallen off a little bit for me. And I've been kind of doing smaller chunks of self-care in those mornings where I have the time to myself. But for the stint that I did those self-care Sundays, I noticed a really big difference in my mental health. So yeah, I think realizing that even as a caregiver, you need time to be selfish, and that's not always a bad thing because it helps you show up better for the people you care about afterwards. That was something that was really key for me because my mental health was definitely suffering when I did not prioritize my own needs.
Yeah. And I think it's just it's really important to have that level of self-awareness where you can sense the patterns of like, oh wow, I am impatient today more than I typically would be. And I wonder why that is. And then you start to realize the things that helped you not show up or react in that way. You either have fallen off on, or you need to do more of. And I definitely relate to this. I live with family, and I'm Caribbean culture, so boundaries is something that is constantly everyday battle. So it's definitely something that I very much so relate to. And it's just so important just to have that open communication and just knowing your limits, because I feel like it's just all about how you communicate it too. I feel like when you see yourself more angry and aggravated, it's just good to take that time to yourself, or to just evaluate certain things about your routine that you kind of need to add on or do more of to make yourself feel better. Because ultimately that's nobody's job but your own. But I completely agree with that. And you mentioned your work. So with your work at Acclinate, you support the health and well-being of Black populations. How can we as a public health profession destigmatize mental health in diverse communities? This could be in our personal lives, professionally, and other platforms and whatnot.
Yes. So at Acclinate, as I mentioned, we are advancing health equity by making sure that clinical research and research in general is inclusive. And we do that through our community engagement platform called Now Included. So I invite anyone who's listening to go to nowincluded.com and create a profile, join the conversation, because it is meant to be a space for all things Black health. And of course, allies are welcome too. But in terms of how we as public health professionals can destigmatize mental health, especially in diverse communities, I think it definitely starts with our personal lives, right? How do we respond when people around us express symptoms of stress and mental illness? Do we respond compassionately, or do we make them feel bad? How do we show up in our personal lives, I think, is definitely key. And also, how do we show up for ourselves, right? Because how we show up for ourselves is going to impact how we show up professionally and how we support other people. So I think when we're open to having those conversations and we practice them with our friends and our family in terms of talking about mental health openly, then that's definitely one way to destigmatize. I think professionally, thinking about what resources we can share, how we can use inclusive language that doesn't stigmatize folks, and also being open to maybe highlighting topics that are otherwise difficult. I know in my past we had employee mental health newsletters that were really impactful because we allowed people to share their stories around topics as sensitive as suicide. And some of our most read, and I don't know if well received is the right word, but the ones that got a ton of engagement were around those really difficult topics because people thought, wow, I thought that this was not something that anyone at work could relate to, or could understand, but they found out that no, that's not the case. They weren't alone, and that there are resources that can help you navigate this so that you can support yourself and support other people who might be going through similar things. So I think as professionals, not shying away from some of those difficult topics, and again, figuring out an inclusive, professional, mindful, considerate, compassionate way to incorporate pushing out mental health resources and topics through your work. Some of us also have platforms that we leverage in order to highlight public health information, right? I have my Instagram page, you have MPH Lens. So even you just talking to me and asking me for my ideas and thoughts, all of us can play a role in destigmatizing mental health as a topic by sharing. So I think that's a big one. And I think over all of this, or through line through all of this in terms of mental health and destigmatization in diverse communities, is remembering that mental health care does not always look like a therapist with glasses on a couch, right? There's a lot of different ways for us to take care of our mental health and well-being. And I think over time, the Western culture has said that mental health care looks like this, but there are so many things that help us take care of our mental health that don't look like traditional therapy. There's movement, there's spirituality, there's just so many different practices. And I think that that needs to be highlighted so that diverse populations feel like there are options and feel like their identities, their culture can be a part of how they take care of their mental health as opposed to it being completely separate. So yeah, that's what comes to mind for me in terms of supporting mental health and well-being and destigmatization in diverse communities.
I completely love that. And I specifically love how your job had the platform of allowing, your other colleagues to express, themselves and their mental standing, and just to have that sense of vulnerability in the workplace. I feel like everybody gravitates towards a sense of community, and everyone kind of just finds some sense of healing when they realize that, I'm not alone in my own thoughts. Like, I'm not the only one who's feeling these feelings, and that it's common. And there's people in different spaces who feel these same feelings. I feel like, especially in professional places, people feel like they have to be bulletproof, amongst their colleagues and peers. But I that's awesome. I wish everybody had that at the workplace, and utilized it in the best, most beneficial way. But we're going to switch gears into our rapid fire questions. What are you currently working on improving in your life right at this moment?
My sleep is still something that I need to be better at. It's really that nighttime routine. I currently suffer from what I've heard people call reverse revenge bedtime procrastination, where after a busy day, then you're like, well, how can I just make the most of this time and stay awake doing not much of anything, just to enjoy the free time at the end of the day, as opposed to, okay, let's get to bed so that we can have the full at least 7 hours of sleep. And again, I know the importance of sleep. If anyone is not convinced of why sleep is so important, definitely check out Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, and it will scare you into sleeping properly. But that's definitely something I'm still working on.
Okay, awesome. And I'll just ask our last question. So you provided us so many tips, but any additional tips that you would recommend for MPH students to better support their mental health?
Yeah, I think a big one that I didn't speak on as much is community. No matter how introverted you are, community can play such a significant role in improving your mental health. I recently heard of this term called mitting, where like MIDDING, where you just enjoy kind of being in the presence of others without necessarily being in the spotlight or engaging with a ton of people. You're just around folks. And because we're just not meant to move through this life by ourselves, right? We're no matter how independent and introverted we are, we depend on other people to survive. And other people can make a really huge impact on us being accountable to our goals, us staying consistent with different practices, and again, just boosting our mood and having connection, right? So I think as people navigate their public health programs, finding community, even if it's just another student in every class, that can make a big difference in your overall experience and your well-being.
Thank you so much for that amazing tip. Honestly, that's such a great way to end this episode. Thank you so much for providing your time. I know it's just such a crazy time between the holidays and, the end of the semester and work. So I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing some amazing tips for the audience and for me personally. Is there any platforms that you would want our followers and listeners to connect with you?
Yeah, people are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I want to say it's linkedin.com/HUYENWIN, maybe. You can fix that in the show notes, I imagine, if that's wrong. But definitely my Instagram is SAYHUYEN. That's where I share a lot of my fitness and well-being tips. So definitely connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I'd be excited to connect with you all.
All righty, that concludes our episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the MPH Lens. Be sure to subscribe so that you can stay in the know when we dig deeper into mental health conversations. And be sure to share with an MPH student you would think who would benefit from this. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.